Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. With me today is Andy Burrows, and Andy is the CEO and founder of Supercharged Finance. Great to have you on the show, Andy. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
So, tell me a little bit about Supercharged Finance and what's the day job look like for you?
Supercharged Finance is about online training and development for finance professionals. Its focus is on maximizing your impact in business and giving you those kind of skills and capabilities that enable you to do a great job for the business, not just the sort of technical nuts and bolts of Excel and ERP systems and that kind of thing. So that's the focus. The day job for me looks like very much like this, except this is you recording me. Sometimes I record myself, make new videos, write articles, and stuff like that.
And so tell me a little bit about where you see the skills gap in some of the CFOs that you're working with. What typically is the gap that they come to you to help address?
I think with CFOs, it's not so much a problem because the kind of cream tends to rise to the top. What I find is that CFOs get very frustrated um, at their team not thinking the same way as they do. Um, so I have this phrase I keep using. Well, I mean, one phrase is CFO readiness. And the reason it's all about CFO readiness is because if you want career progression, every role in the finance department heads towards the CFO role. So if you want progression in finance, you're going to have to get CFO ready, no matter how far you want to go. But the thing about CFO readiness is that if you think about it, um, you have to start with what is a CFO? And as I keep saying, CFOs are business leaders, not just advanced level accountants. So if you want to be it takes a different approach to what you used to. So I think one of the problems the finance teams, or so we say, finance professionals have, is that switch. They've got qualified as an accountant, and they keep on in this kind of mindset that, oh, I just have to keep doing some training and getting some more certificates and filling my head with knowledge. And it's not about that anymore. CFO readiness, if you want to progress in the finance function and you want that chance to be CFO ready, you want to be a help to the CFO, be more like him or her, um, then you have to focus on different things. And those are more in the sense of business acumen and behavioral skills like effectiveness, emotional intelligence, communication, interpersonal skills, those kind of things. So that's where I think the gaps are really. We've got loads of um, opportunities to upskill in technical areas, FP&A and different tools like Power BI and stuff like that. But actually, the core of development that you really need to progress through your career is in those kind of CFO readiness skills.
And how do you train or coach business acumen? Because it's almost, in some ways, you think about acumen as being an experience-based skill. So you only get by being in those kind of environments. How can you coach junior members of the team to develop that as a skill?
Well, the approach I use is what I always say is that experience doesn't have to be accidental. When we say it's kind of you pick it up by experience, it feels quite accidental. You kind of accidentally pick up these nuggets of knowledge and skill along the way. What I really try and encourage is people to do that intentionally. So, and then the question comes back: how do you do that intentionally? How can I go out and get knowledge that I don't even know? I don't know what I don't know. And really, it's about um, getting out there and asking, and it's about insatiable curiosity. Um, I was having a conversation with Steve Rothwald of CFO University. And we were talking about insatiable curiosity. It's just asking questions. And what I encourage people to do, like I've got this program I run called CFO Readiness Builder program. In the business acumen module, in that, what I give people is three projects basically, and you could call them research projects, but it's kind of knowledge base projects. So there's one that looks at, go and find out what the value drivers are. Draw a value driver tree. And if you've seen anything I've put out on LinkedIn, you'll see, I have this, thing that I put out there called a value driver tree. And you put that together, and that sort of gets you to find out what makes the business perform well. But then there are other things as well, like, how is the business organized? What do the different departments do? How do you see things from their point of view? And one of the nice things about that is that in order to find out those things for that project, you have to go and ask people. So it's a big, um, like a mental block for people to get over. This is not normal, you know, finance professional, just qualified accountant thing to do. Like, just go and ask someone a question. Um, but what I try to encourage people is that, if you think of it the other way, if someone from marketing or operations comes and says to you, "Do you mind spending half an hour just telling me what you do?" You'd be thrilled to bits, because no one's interested in what you do, so you think. Um, so it must be the same the other way around. You go to the guys in marketing or operations or HR or supply chain or whatever, and you say, "Can I spend half an hour with you? I'm trying to do this homework to you know build up my knowledge of the business and how it fits together and how it works." I reckon pretty near 100% of people will make time for you. And it's getting into that. That project can take anything from a month to 6 months or a year. It's kind of an ongoing, rolling thing where the more you talk to people, the more knowledge you gain. The more knowledge you gain, the more you start to make connections. The better the relationships you build with people. Then they start to come back and talk to you about things, and the whole thing snowballs from there.
And in terms of, you talked about we're talking about insatiable curiosity.
Yeah.
How, like that, how do you build that skill within your finance team? What sort of tactics do you have around that? Because again, that feels like a personality attribute versus a skill. So talk to us a little bit about how you drive that.
That is a really good point. It's not something I'd say I've cracked, um, but one of the things I try to do is, when I talk about development, I tend to put it in terms of, and I put it this way: mindset, skills, habits, and behaviors. So it's not just all about skills. It's not all about, you know, here's a procedure for doing this skill, and once you've learned it, you can do it. We need new habits, new behaviors, so new ways of working. And I think insatiable curiosity kind of fits in that ways of working. Um, and it's building, well, it's a whole host of things. It's having the confidence to ask questions, but it's also having the inclination to ask questions. Because you're right, if I reflect back, I've always just had curiosity. When I was like, whenever it was, 19, 20, and I was doing a vacation job, I was just doing data entry. And I kept asking the engineers, what do these codes mean? And I just couldn't help myself. And as they told me what the codes meant, you know, 20 minutes later, I'd spot that there was some anomaly, and I'd go back to them saying, "Well, you said this was this, and I think this is an error." And they go, "Oh, yeah, well spotted." It's like, and I just couldn't help it. Wherever I was, whatever I was doing, I had to know. Um, but I realize, and I've run enough teams to know that there's people in there who just don't have that inclination. And I think probably the way through to it is to, uh, and I learned this quite early on in my career, is to adopt a coaching mentality. So And one of the key things as a leader, if you adopt a coaching kind of stance, if someone comes to you with a question, or someone comes to you with um, a something, you don't necessarily answer the question. You get them to answer the question. So you kind of take them through a process and say, okay, um, this isn't quite what I was after, but what is it? Do you think we were looking for? And you ask them questions. You say, well, how is that different to what you were looking for? And what do you think the options are for like bridging that gap? What do you think you could do differently? And and then at the end of it, what are you going to do differently? So you kind of send them away with a few thoughts, but they're thoughts that they've come up with. And that's the important part, is you can't tell someone to go and be curious. You have to kind of pique their curiosity by just asking them questions, and getting used to being asked questions. And if they keep on being asked questions, they have to think about them. So and as they think about them, hopefully their curiosity and their thoughtfulness increases.
And you mentioned obviously the curiosity increases. Are there people you find, like, do you when you would you purposely recruit for curiosity? And if you would, how can you assess that?
Another great question. I think I've never consciously gone out, and maybe I would now. The thing about having set up Supercharged Finance 7 years ago, uh, nearly 8 years ago actually, um, is it's taught me a lot. I've had to think things through, and even though I've always had that curiosity and known it was a thing, I think it's become more of a ingrained part of what I teach. So in the past, I wouldn't have said, I'm going to put it on the job description, must be curious. Um, but if I reflect back on interviews that I've done, um, it would be about building a rapport, and um, I would naturally gravitate to somebody who showed an interest in the business and the role. And so somebody who had lots of questions and seemed to be relaxed at asking questions would be someone that I would connect with more readily than somebody who just said, um, you know, no, that's fine. Don't have anything I need to know, and that's it. So I think subconsciously, more consciously, probably now, I would have been on the lookout for somebody who is showing an interest and showing that kind of spark.
No, I look for it in consultants, but a bit like you, is that I've not found a really good way to assess it. So
Yeah.
it's one of those pieces where I think if you want to get into any like that development of processes, of systems, of, and like you say, business acumen, which as consultants we have to be able to do to understand the business quickly. That
Mm.
curiosity piece is, yeah, it is super interesting. But like you say, I wonder if someone's ever put together a test for it. It'd be really interesting to understand.
Yeah.
And maybe something for another podcast.
Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned a little bit further back that there are mindsets and behaviors that you see in successful finance individuals, or those that are starting up to move up the chain. What do those behaviors and skills and mindsets look like? What are some of the things that you talk about with your students?
Um, I think the the um, the biggest thing I talk about on one level is a mindset thing. I call it a business focused finance mindset, and that's basically just to have the mindset. It's literally just a switch, like mindset switch that says everything that I do is to help the business, and you'd be amazed how much difference that makes, just to know that everything that I do helps the business, or should help the business. And so you go on then and go, well, if this thing is supposed to help the business, why am I doing it this way? Can I do it a different way? So, even to the point of thinking, um, you know, if you're being business focused, one of the I think it's probably a kind of implication of this, um, is that it changes your finance mindset to looking at value rather than just cost. Because the business is trying to trying to increase value, make a profit, increase its shareholder value, and that kind of thing. It's not just trying to reduce costs. Whereas finance people are really fixated, I've found, on cost. Um, Almost, 80% is cost, 20% is revenue. Whereas we've got to get into the habit of this expense that we're managing, we're spending that money in order to make money. In order for the business to perform. So you need to know before you go getting the axe to it, what is that getting us in terms of revenue and value? Um, you need to understand that so that you can do cost control a lot better. So that's a kind of business focused finance mindset that I talk about. Um, and then I try to break down the other side of it is I try to break down the journey to CFO readiness into stages, and I call them promotion triggers. Um, and it's really to bring out the important things. It's kind of what makes the difference to move up the ladder towards that CFO readiness that you want. And they're kind of simple concepts, but behind them there's a bunch of skills, habits, and behaviors that help you to get there. And at the very bottom level, you've got do a great job and be continuously learning and able to learn, keen to learn. Comes back to what we were saying about curiosity. And then when you that gets you up to a kind of middle level, because if you do a great job, they will want to promote you. Everyone wants to promote people who are high performers. Um, but what they'll want to do is promotion means either you're going to get a team so you can tell them how to perform better because you know how to perform. You can teach other people how to perform well, or it's going to mean closer contact with the rest of the business, because it's like you'll be trusted not to embarrass finance when you go out and about, so you get a bigger remit. And then after that, it's building that reputation, getting a good reputation within the business, and learning to get results out of your team. If you can do those two things, then you kind of move up through the sort of management levels. And then if you want to get to CFO level, the icing on the cake is strategic insights. If you can use that reputation in the business, your business knowledge, leadership skills, and interpersonal skills to deliver strategic insight, that's when people will start seeing you as a CFO. So what I teach is all about how you move up through those ladders from the bottom to the top.
And when you see individuals coming through, so you just tell us a little bit more about sorts of almost like checkpoints that each person can tick themselves off against as they go through those levels. What are the sorts of checkpoints and areas that you would say people need to self-assess on?
Um, I think, firstly, high performance habits, as I call them, they're not very difficult, but people find them really difficult to implement for some reason. It's almost like they're too simple to put into practice. People just write them off, but they are really simple. Um, so high performance habits like having a personal mission, knowing your long term goals, knowing your goals in any piece of work, and organizing your time to achieve the goals that you've got, to the standards that you need to. So that's one checkpoint, and that you wouldn't believe how many people fail at that checkpoint. That's like checkpoint number one. Um, Secondly, is more of type of work, type of checkpoint. What I always say is early on in your career as a finance professional, you do need to get experience across two or three key areas. There's financial control, reporting, and planning and analysis. It's like if you've gone the control route and you're literally just doing reporting, you're going to fall down because you haven't got the kind of planning and analysis side, and that's more getting the commercial business acumen side. So you're going to be hampered if you don't have that. Whereas the converse is also true. If you've gone up the FP&A route and you've never done any reporting and control and balance sheet recs and anything, you're going to fall down because CFOs get sacked if the accounts are fall apart and the accounting's no good and you're full of errors. So you need to have experience across both those legs. So that's another checkpoint. I suppose once you go up the ladder, um, uh, having a team and getting good feedback from your team, that sort of 360 feedback, if you like, is an important kind of milestone. And then getting good feedback from people outside the finance function. I guess that still encompasses 360-degree feedback. Um, yeah, I can't think of anything else. Those kind of early milestones are really important.
And when you're thinking about, you talked about the value tree earlier and talking about business value. So tell us a little bit about that as a model, because that was quite interesting in terms of, like you say, understanding how your business is operating. So you talked a lot about how people can sort of measure their performance and step up into different conversations, and talked a lot about experience across different departments. But if we go back to the fundamentals, how should we be thinking in finance about a business? What are some of the things we should be considering?
I, I think it's learning to think kind of underneath the numbers, or because of the what do the numbers tell us, um, but almost kind of completely detached from that and just forget about the numbers for a little while and just talk about things, and in essence, what the value driver tree is. If you can picture, it's like a flow diagram, and on the left hand side, um, that the left hand side, you've got the vision of the business, and that could be, like when I was working for Centrica, this is where I learned that. Centrica PLC, they wanted to be top quartile growth in shareholder value, um, and that included obviously appreciation in share price and dividends, and you know. So what you do is you put that as one box right at the very end, and then you draw lines. You say, right, okay, what drives that shareholder value? Um, and at some point you get to, well, profitability helps quite a bit. What drives profitability? So you come over another little bit and you go, well, it's revenue and cost. But then once you get past that, you go, well, how is revenue driven? And this is where it gets into this bit of a subjective area, because you can cut it different ways. So it's either number of customers times number of products times amount, mix or whatever, um, or it could be number of one-time customers versus number of repeat customers, um, and so it's kind of learning what are the things that are driving revenue, what are the things that are driving cost. In Centrica's case, one of the big revelations for me was they talked about, um, they put their cost drivers in terms of cost to acquire customers, cost to serve customers, um, and cost to maintain. Um, because what they found through doing that analysis was that it costs something like 5 times as much to acquire a new customer than it did to keep an existing customer or to service an existing customer. So what that said was we should be working a lot harder we could spend a lot more doing stuff for our current existing customers so that we keep them, because that actually costs a lot less than trying to go out and win a new customer to replace one that's left. But that was in the context of British Gas, the energy. You think the discipline is really think of it in terms of your own business, what business you're working in, whether that's telecoms or media or professional services or whatever. What is actually driving revenue and what is actually driving cost in a meaningful way of looking at it, or multiple ways of looking at it. You could do different options, but it's that value driver tree is that sort of well, it looks like a tree on its side to the ultimate value that you want. And it's learning to think. When I go back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, it's learning to think of that in terms of what. I talked about cost to acquire customers, cost to serve customers. You talked about how many customers, margins. If you go even further back, you'd go, how many people are going to the website? What's our brand perception? Market position. These are not nailed down, objective, hard financial facts, but they are things that drive the performance of the business. So you've got to think in terms of those. And actually, it's a good discipline to get into, because as you get into that, you'll go, oh, this is a real grey area. And yeah, that's what business is. It's a huge grey area. You've got to get used to living in the grey area.
And that's a really interesting piece, because actually like you say, taking the time to spend with customer success, with marketing, with sales helps you understand that piece. Because as you said earlier, like even when we're talking about the value drivers, we're talking about cost of acquisition, we're talking about cost of serving customers. So you're always focused on that end piece without understanding, right, what improves the conversion rate, and almost thinking in that forward piece. So have you got any tactics or tips for finance leaders to help their teams think more about revenue as well as cost?
Ooh, I think it's just having that mindset. I mean, I once advised people to put a post-it note on and put hashtag business focused finance on the monitor, just to emphasize. So, and maybe one tip would be actually to as a leader, get your team together and just brainstorm the implications of it. If you want people to think in that way, you've firstly got to exemplify that mindset. So you're always talking in those terms, but also you've got to encourage people to think in those terms and ask for their thoughts in those terms. So you could say, what are things we could do to encourage thinking more about value rather than just cost? Or you could take an example. So one example that springs to mind is when you look at a project. All of us have done project business cases or reviewed project business cases, and what I found in the past is that they tend to be very cost focused. You're focused on you need to nail down the cost. We need to get that cost into the forecast, into the budget. That was the big focus of finance. And then it was kind of, we need to see it making a positive NPV, but we didn't really go and validate the benefits that greatly. And what I learned again at Centrica was actually to reverse that and make it benefits led and say, this project is all about adding value in this way. It's strategic because it fits in with our strategy of X, Y, and Z. And the benefit of doing this project, the benefit we're trying to get out of it, is to solve this strategic issue, whether that be efficiency or marketing effectiveness or whatever it might be. And if you start to understand what benefits they're trying to get out of it, then the costs kind of they are what they are. Actually, and that comes in useful when you talk about it later on down the line, when the sort of costs are going slightly over budget or under budget, or you're talking about you know making cost savings. It's like, oh yeah, we can just slash this project. Probably not, because that was the project you may have been relying on to fill some revenue gap or solve some efficiency problem. So it kind of changes the way of thinking from being that cost focused to being absolutely benefits focused. This is what we're trying to do. And I suppose the other thing to do, this is one of my other themes, is because I like Stephen Covey, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Keep coming back to start with the end in mind. Habit 2, start with the end in mind. Always be thinking, why? Why am I doing this? Why is the business doing this? And that will tend to lead you back to value questions.
And one final question for you, Andy. So we've talked a huge amount about business acumen on
Yeah.
this podcast. How do if you're a CFO with an existing team, how do you actually go about assessing the acumen levels of that existing team? How do you benchmark them and figure out where they might need some skills investment?
Good question. I don't know. That it's one of those subjective measurements, and I suppose I've tried to. I'm always on the lookout for better ways to do this, but um, the way I tend to do it is with a kind of 360-degree feedback. So that individual, because I look at it from the kind of finance professional point of view, because so it's them doing this 360 degrees. What does their boss think? What does their team think? What does their colleagues think of how well they know the business? And I suppose it's like you could say it's the non-finance opinion piece of it, which you could do in a kind of um, I hate the phrase, but customer survey. I don't really like the other parts of the business being called customers. That's why I hate the term, really. But in reality, we do kind of service their needs in the process of serving business performance. So if you ask them, how much do you think I know about the business or your part of the business? If they say naff all, you're pretty, score not naff. Let's put it 0 out of 10. If they say 0, then you need help. If they say 10, then you're doing pretty well. If you can get a cross section of different non-finance people saying, yeah, this person seems to understand what we're trying to do, then you've kind of got that benchmark. But it's not something you could benchmark across organizations, I don't think, because there's no standard way of measuring it. But I think as a CFO, trying to measure the your team, asking what the other parts of the business think about your team, and individuals in the team, both collectively and as individuals, is probably the way to go. And if you can get people to score it, that gives you a way of measuring improvement. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's like having done a few 360s, there's normally a section on business acumen in those 360s, but maybe tailoring it to suit the finance aspect would be interesting to do. And I have to ask, right, because you did bring it up, why do you dislike calling the rest of the business customers? Tell us about that.
Um, because I have this aversion to, ever since I went to work at Barclays, I qualified as a chartered accountant, then I went to work for Barclays. And they would keep saying to me, oh, the bank says you must do this, and the bank says you must do that. And I would say, who's the bank? Show me the bank. I want to talk to it. And it's like, no, some individual who works for the bank or some department has said this. So for one thing, I don't like depersonalizing. We work with people. We don't work with an entity called the business. Um, the second thing is the business is all of us. Um, and it's an organization that includes all of us, and we all have that shared common goal. So I, I do have the aversion. I don't like the term business partner either. It's like finance can partner with the business. We're not the business. We can partner with the business. It's like, no, that's rubbish. We're all parts of the business. We all have a part to play. So that's why I tend to talk about non-finance areas of the business and finance. We're all part of the business. Um, and that's kind of why I don't like looking at other parts of the business as customers, because again, it adds that arm's length into it. R- If I can put it this way, this is the first time I've thought of this, by the way. If I can use an arm's round rather than an arm's length, we're not keeping people at arm's length and saying, I am handing something over. I'm somebody who has my arms around your shoulder. I'm going to be alongside you and I'll contribute what I can contribute. And together we're going to win this. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. Does that
And
make
that
any
is
sense?
it does. I think the like you sort of summed up at the end there. It's about the distance that thinking of the rest of the business's customers brings to finance. And actually we need to see finance embedded within the organization versus necessarily
Yeah.
just serving the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
So amazing. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Andy. It was great to end on that note about the connection between finance and the rest of the organization. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and insight today. And if we want to learn more about you, about your organization, where can they find you? What's the best place to discover what you're up to?
I think the best place to go, or the place I would like you to go, is superchargedfinance.com. That will tell you all about what uh, courses I'm running. It'll tell you about CFO Readiness Builder, which I'd love people to consider joining up for. And in fact, I'm enrolling very soon. Um, but apart from that, and that's got all my blog articles on there and stuff like that. So you can find out a lot about what I think and stuff like that on there. Um, Aside from that, LinkedIn I tend to frequent every day. I've got a bit of a following on there, and I love interacting with people on LinkedIn. So catch up with me there too.
Brilliant. And for those of you that, as usual, we'll pop the links in the show notes so that you can get access to that afterwards. So thanks very much, Andy, for joining me on the show. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining me on the podcast today. And we'll see you next time on CFO 4.0.